Good day. Today we will be looking at Grade 10 Mathematics Paper 1, November 2017, and it's a Department of Education paper. So we're going to be working through the whole paper. The mark allocation is 100 and it should take 2 hours. On this page we have all our instructions and we're going to go ahead straight to question 1. Question 1 is where our algebra starts. So question 1 says, given q is equal to b squared minus 4ac, determine the value of q if a is equal to 2, b is equal to -1, and c is equal to -4. Leave your answer in the simplest surd form. Okay, so that is just a basic substitution question. Okay. So we're just going to substitute. So 1.1.1, they said q is equal to the root of b squared minus 4ac, and now we're just going to substitute in, and it says leave your answer in the simplest surd form. So b is -1 squared minus 4a is 2 and c is -4. Okay, you can simply just put the calculations into your calculator, but it's going to be 1. It now becomes 1 because the negative squared is a positive. Minus, and a minus is going to give me a positive. And then 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 4 is 32. So my answer in its simplest surd form is root 33. Okay. So that is question 1.1 done. Question 1.1.2 says state whether q is rational or irrational. So this is irrational. Okay, and if you want to understand the difference between rationals and irrational, then you're going to have to think about what is a rational number firstly. Okay, so a rational number is a number that includes any whole number, a fraction, or a decimal, whereas an irrational number is a number that cannot be turned into a fraction. So it's a number that doesn't fit the definition of a rational number. Okay, and if we want to think of some examples, so rational, I said was anything like a whole number, a fraction. So it can be 7/8, it can be decimals 3.4, it can be whole numbers too, like 1, 2, 3. It can be roots that are proper, that are integers. So 49, which would give me 7. So that is rational. Okay. Whereas irrational numbers are things like root of 10, root of 33, root of 2, root of 3. They aren't rational numbers. They don't fit the definition of a rational number. Okay. Okay, let's go to our next question and we'll erase that just now. Then 1.1.3 says between which two consecutive integers does q lie? Okay, so my integers are my numbers on a number line. And we're looking at 33. Okay, so we want to know between which two integers. So we're going to want to think of our roots that will give me numbers that fall between 33. So we've got 1, then we'd have root of 4, which would give me 2. The next one would be 3, which would be 9, 4, which would be 16, 5, which would be 25, and 6, which would be 36. So 33 falls between 5 and 6. Okay, because it falls between root of 25 and root of 36. So the answer will be between 5 and 6. Okay. Okay, I'm now going to erase the section and we're going to now look at 1.2. Okay, 1.2.1. So 1.2, the instructions is saying factorize. Okay, So we know when we have an instruction that says factorize, we're doing the opposite of simplification. We're breaking it down. We're breaking our sum down until we can no longer factorize anymore. Okay? So let's take a look firstly at 1.2.1. So I always tell my students when looking at factorization questions, when I teach factorization, I teach it in the way that you should be able to identify what you are seeing. What type of factorization are you doing? So let's take a look at 1.2.2 first, and we're just identifying. So at the top, you should be able to identify that this is a sum of cubes. Okay? And at the bottom, you should be able to identify that it has the structure of a trinomial. And this is going to guide how you are going to work out these sums. And then looking back at 1.2.1, I can see more than 4 variables. It actually looks quite long compared to the usual. So this is definitely going to have to be grouping. Okay, let's start by looking at 1.2.1. So what they give me is they tell me that I have t squared r minus s minus r plus s. So with a grouping question, we want to essentially create two groups that are already the same. And they've already guided me by giving me this r minus s. So I want to use that to my advantage, and I want to manipulate this side so that it's also r minus s. That's going to involve sign changes. Okay, so I'm going to take out a negative, and I want to maintain this positive sign. So a negative times this negative maintains that positive sign. And now I've got the same groups. So now I can group. Many students get confused now as to what to do after this. But don't forget that there's a 1 that is there. So I'm going to group r and s, and then I'm going to have t squared minus 1. And this is a 3-mark question, which is telling me that that is not the end of my answer. This is a difference of 2 squares, it's dots. Okay, so r minus s is going to give me t plus 1, t minus 1, and I can no longer factorize. That is the end of my sum. Okay, so it's important to factorize until you can no longer factorize. Okay, the next one was 1.2.1, and we already were able to identify that we have a sum of cubes and we have a trinomial at the bottom. Okay, so sum of cubes and difference of cubes, it has a specific structure that you should know, and you know that it's got 2 brackets. The first one is going to look at the first term, and it's going to be x. The cube of that would be x, and the cube of 1 is 1. And there's a specific sign order that you should remember, which is plus, minus, plus, when it's a sum of cubes. Okay, now this is going to be x squared. This is going to be 1 squared, which is 1. And in the middle, I multiply the 2, which is just x. The bottom, we've got a trinomial. We need factors. So we look at the first term first. We've got x, we've got x. We look at our last term, we've got 1 and 1. Now we just need to make sure our signs are correct. Okay? And looking at my signs, actually, we were factorizing, but we didn't need to factorize. And why did we not need to factorize? Because I didn't identify what I have at the top, which is exactly the same as what I have at the bottom. And they can then be cancelled out, and my answer is x plus 1. Okay. So that is a factorization question. The next question we are going to look at is the simplification part. Okay. So it says simplify the following. The first one that we get given is just a distribution. The second one, we're going to need to find denominators or see how we go from there in LCD. And the third one is going to involve factorizing to simplify this question. Okay, so let's take a look firstly at 1.3.1. Fairly easy, it's just distribution. 2y plus 3, 7y squared minus 6y minus 8, and you need to distribute. So I'm going to use two different colors. We're going to distribute the 2y first, and then we're going to distribute the 3. So distributing the 2y is going to times by the 7, by the 6, and by the 8. Okay, so 2y times 7y squared is going to give me 14y cubed. 2y times negative 6y is going to be minus 12y squared. 2y times minus 8 minus 16y. Now we're going to go to the 3. 3 is going to multiply by each term, same concept. So we've got 3 times 7y squared is 21y squared. 3 times minus 6 minus 18y, and 3 times minus 8 is minus 24. Now you're going to want our like terms. So I don't have another y cubed. I do have 2y squareds, and I do have 2 just plain y's. We're going to add and subtract our like terms. Okay, so I've got 14y3 minus 12 plus 21y squared is 9y squared. Minus 16y minus 18y is minus 34y minus 24. Okay, the next one, 1.3.2, we're working with fractions. Okay, so we know with these types of questions you've got LCDs. Okay, so 1.3.2, it's 3 over x squared minus 9 plus 2 over x minus 3 squared. Okay, so let's take a look at that now. So the first thing always with maths, I say if you are overwhelmed by the question, break it up and do what you can do. So the first thing that I would think to do that I can see is that I've got a difference of 2 squares here. So I'm going to factorize it. Even though the question says simplify, it's going to assist me in simplifying. Okay, so I'm going to have an x plus 3 and x minus 3. And on this side, nothing is going to change. Okay, so I've just got the x minus 3 squared. Now when you are creating your LCD, you want your LCD to include one of everything. Okay, it's got to be able to incorporate all of what we have. So it's going to be x minus 3 squared. That accounts for this denominator, and we are accounting for 1 x minus 3 here, but we've still got to also include that x plus 3. Okay, so for this first fraction, what does it have? It has 1 from the denominator, and it has the x plus 3, but it's missing another 1 of this x minus 3. So we've got to include that at the top, and don't forget that 3. On the other one, we have the 2 x plus 3's, but we're missing the x plus 3. So we're going to add that. Okay. So now we're going to simplify. So we're going to keep the denominator. Denominator doesn't go away. So we've got 3x minus 9 plus 2x plus 6. Okay, some like terms we can subtract and add so that we can simplify as much as possible, and then we're going to have 5x minus 3 over denominator stays. X minus 3 squared, x plus 3. Okay, let's take a look at the overall picture of what we did here. So firstly was we found our LCD, and then we had to simplify, making sure that we distribute everything that didn't follow, and then we just simplified. Okay, the last question that we have in this section is 1.3.3. Okay, 3. I'm going to write it out over here for means of access of space. Okay. 1.3.3. We've got 3t minus 3t minus 2 all over 2 times 3t minus 3t. Okay, first thing that I can see is that I have common factors that I can take out. Okay, so I'm going to take out 3t as a common factor on the top and at the bottom. Okay, so at the top I'm going to be left with 1 minus 3 to the power of negative 2. At the bottom I'm going to be left with 2 minus 1. Simple. Cancel out the factors that we have because they're both at the top, and now it's just a matter of simplifying numbers. 1 minus 1 over 9 over 1. You can, if this overwhelms you and you don't know how to solve this, put it into your calculator. But essentially what it is that 1 is 9 over 9 minus 1 over 9, which is answer is going to be 8 over 9. Okay. Algebra section in paper 1 is where you can score a lot of your marks, and it's not difficult if you just are able to identify and follow the steps. Okay, let's now look at question 2, where we've got an inequality, and generally we also get simultaneous in this section, and a little bit of a problem solving question. Okay, 2.1 says, given 4 minus 2x is less than 16 where x is equal to r, solve the inequalities part 1, part 2 represent on the number line. Okay, so let's work here. So my inequality is 4 minus 2x is less than 16. And what we're essentially doing in inequalities is that we want to isolate x and find an answer for x. So I'm going to leave my 2x on this side and I'm going to take the 4 to the other side. Remember, when it changes sides, the sign changes. So minus 2x is less than 12. I'm now going to divide by negative 2 because I'm wanting to isolate x. Rule. When we divide an inequality by a negative, the sign changes to the opposite. Okay, so you're going to see that in action now. So it's going to be x, sign is going to change to the opposite side. Okay, and it's going to be greater than negative 6. Okay, now putting this on a number line, I want to quickly revise the rules of inequalities with a number line. Okay, so there's 3 things that they can ask you in inequalities. They can ask you to put it in interval notation. They can ask it in set builder notation. And they can ask you for the number line. Okay, so interval notation is brackets. So if it is a greater than or less than with an equal to, your brackets are square brackets. If it is just a normal greater or less than, your brackets are rounded brackets. Then for set builder notation it's better explained when we have an example, but set builder notation is when x falls between a value of, say, negative 2 and 5. Okay, number line, when it is the greater than or equals to, it's a colored in circle. When it is a less than, it is an open circle. Okay, that is the gist of the number line. And make sure that you plot the number line numbers in a chronological order. Okay, so here is my 0, therefore negative 6 has to be here. And we're saying that x is, so we know now that it's just a normal greater than, so it's an open circle. And they're saying that x is greater, so greater is going, it's getting bigger, so the arrow is going to go in that direction. Okay, the next question says solve simultaneously for x and y. Okay, in tests and exams, they don't tell you which method you should use. So you are welcome to use whichever method you are more comfortable with. But I generally tell my students that if you have a plain variable, so if there's just an individual y or an individual x with no number attached to it in your question, it is easy to use substitution. Whereas if you don't, like if this was 3y, okay, you give me a second. You don't want to essentially be working simultaneous question. So therefore you would use elimination. But if you have a plain variable, such as in this question, we can easily use substitution method. Okay, so let's work through the substitution method now. So 2.2, they give me minus 2x minus y is equal to 10, and they give us 3x minus 4y is equal to minus 4. Okay, so we are substituting. That is what we said. So we're firstly going to want to manipulate this question so that we can substitute. So I'm going to leave the minus 2x on the side. I'm going to take the 10 to the side and take the y to that side. It's going to be minus 10 is equal to positive y. Now I am going to substitute. This is my new equation. So this was 1. Label your equations. This is 2, and this is my new. You can either label this your new 1 or your 3. Okay? I'm going to label it 1 prime, which is telling me that it's coming from equation 1. So I'm going to substitute 1 prime into 2. You could also even label this as 3. Whatever works better for you. I like to label it as 1 prime because it's telling me that it came from 1. Okay? So I'm now substituting y into 2. So 3x doesn't change. Minus 4. The y is going to be substituted there. So minus 2x minus 10 is equal to minus 4. Simple simplification. 3x plus 8x plus 40 is equal to minus 4. So I've got 11x on the side is equal to minus 4 minus 40. So 11x is equal to minus 44. Divide by 11, divide by 11, x is equal to minus 4. Once you've got your x, fairly easy. I take this x and I substitute it back into any equation, but I'm going to substitute it back into 1 prime. Then I'm easily going to get my value of y, minus 2, minus 4, minus 10, and that was going to give me minus 2. So therefore my answer is minus 4, minus 2. Simultaneous equations are an easy way to get a lot of marks in a test, so never neglect knowing how to properly articulate your answers and put together your simultaneous answers. Okay, next question says solve for x. Okay, so now we're going to our equation section where it's asking us to solve for the value of x. Okay, so all equations, when we're solving for x, we want to isolate x as much as possible so that we just have x is equal to what our answer is going to be. So they give me x minus 5 over 6 minus 1 equals to 0. Okay, as I said, we're wanting to isolate x. Okay, so how am I going to simplify this? Firstly, I want to get rid of this 6. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 6 to get rid of that fraction. Okay, so on this side I'm going to be left with x minus 5 minus 6 still equals to 0. I'm going to simply times this out. So it's going to be x squared minus 5x minus 6 equals to 0. What do I have here now? This is a trinomial. So I need to factorize this trinomial. Brackets. We look at the first term is x squared. So I'm going to have an x and an x. What factors of 6 are likely to give me 5? Either 6 and 1 or 3 and 2. But because it's 5, I'm going to actually go with 6 and 1. and because of my signs. So because the 5 is a negative sign, my bigger number is going to be negative and my other number is going to be positive because this is a negative. Therefore, x minus 6 is equal to 0, or x plus 1 is equal to 0. So x is going to be equal to 6, or x is equal to negative 1. Okay, simple. Let's look at the next one, which is giving me 2.3.2. It says c is equal to the root of a plus 2x. Don't get confused or overwhelmed by the fact that there's a c and an a. The question is still essentially the same. Solve for x. Okay? So I want to get rid of this root, so I'm going to square both sides. So I'm going to have c squared is equal to a plus 2x. Still the same concept. I'm wanting to isolate x, so c squared minus a is equal to 2x. Divide by 2. X is equal to c squared minus a over 2. Very simple sum, but the fact that it has a c and an a throws students off, and they don't know where to begin, what to do, and they get confused and they think that this is not the right answer. So just do as much as you can, is what I always say. Do what you think you should do. Okay. Even if you don't think it is the right answer. Okay, let's look at the little problem solving question. So it says, okay, let me just erase this quickly. Then we have more space on this side. It says, Tabelo is currently 4 times as old as his daughter Linda. Okay, 6 years from now, he will be 3 times as old as Linda. Calculate Linda's age currently. So this is forcing us to make use of concepts that should be known in algebra. Okay, so we're going to say Linda's age is x, because we essentially are wanting to find x. It's a solve for x question. We're wanting Linda's age. Right now, Tabelo is 4 times Linda's age, is what it says. So he is currently 4x. Okay, 6 years from now. Okay, so in 6 years from now, Linda will be x plus 6 years. And 6 years from now, Tabelo is going to be 3 times of Linda's age, so it's going to be 3x plus 6. Because he's not going to be 3 times her current age, he's going to be 3 times her age in 6 years. Okay? So essentially we've got an equation of now. Oh, sorry, 1 second. We've got an equation where we're going to be comparing now and 6. So the equation is going to include compared to 6 years from now. So my now is that we've got Tabelo's age is 4x currently, but in 6 years, he's going to be equal to the same as 3x plus 6. So his current age is 4x plus 6 years is going to be equal to the same thing as 3 times Linda's age. And we're solving now for x. So 4x plus 6 is equal to 3x plus 18. So 4x minus 3x is equal to 18 minus 6. X is therefore equal to 12. Linda's age is 12. So if you want me to explain that one more time, I will. So I'm saying we said that Linda's age is x. We said that Linda's father is 4 times her age right now. So his age right now is 4x. Pretend 4x is a number. Let's say it's 30 years old. Okay, so currently is 30, which is 4x. In 6 years, Linda is going to be x plus 6. Okay, her age is x, in 6 years is going to be added 6 to that. So, but they say that at that time, her father will be 3 times her age, which is 3x plus 6. So therefore, his age in the future, which is 3 times Linda's age, is the same as his current age, which is 4x plus 6 years. And that's how we create an equation to solve for x. Okay. Don't spend too much of time on these questions if it's confusing you and you're unsure what to say. Just put the information that you understand down and move on and come back to it towards the end. So for a question like this, you get 2 marks just for stating 4x and x plus 6. So just put down what you understand from the equation and move on and come back to it later if you didn't know how to put together the equation to solve for her age. Okay. The next question we're going to look at now is question 3. We're moving on to number patterns. So it says, consider the linear sequence. So we're working with the linear sequence. We've got 5, 8, 11. We've got a missing value of b. We've got 17. First question says, write down the value of b. So that is going to involve us. So let's just work. We're only working with 3.1 for now. My pattern is 5, 8, 11, b, and 17. So because it's linear, I know it's going to be fairly easy in terms of the pattern. So each one we're adding 3. Therefore, b is going to be equal to 11 plus 3. 11 plus 3 is equal to b, so b is equal to 14. Okay, the next question says determine the nth sequence. Okay, so they're wanting us to determine the nth sequence of this linear pattern. Okay, and you should know your formula of how to calculate it. So the one that I use is Tn is equal to a plus n minus 1d. So a is my first term, n stays as n, and my difference is 3. So it's going to be 5 plus 3n minus 3, so it's equal to 3n plus 2. Different teachers teach it in different ways. The memo has a different method. This is the way that I like students. So just learning this pattern, know that a is your first term, d is your difference. Okay. Next, calculate the value of the 15th term. So seeing as we got our equation, it should be fairly easy to calculate the 15th term. So we want t 15, which is equal to 3. We're substituting in n plus 2. Use your calculator, which is going to be 45 plus 2, so it's going to be 47. Next question says, which term in the sequence is equal to 83? So now we're working in the reverse. We want to find the value of n. Okay. So we know that the value of, so let's just write it out first. So Tn is equal to 3n plus 2. We know that the value of the term is 83. We're wanting to find which term this is. So which n this is. So we're going to take the 2 to the other side. So 83 minus 2 is equal to 3n. So it's 81 is equal to 3n. We took the 2 to the other side, so we got 81 is equal to 3n. Now divide both sides by 3. N will therefore be equal to 27. So it is the 27th term. Okay. And I think that was all of the first part, which was 3.1, working with our linear sequence. Okay, so this was all the questions working with the linear. We're now going to go to the next question, which I think is going to be a quadratic. I'm going to take a look at it now. Okay. Consider the number pattern created below by using the numbers of the sequence 2, 6, 10, 14, 18. Okay, so they're using those numbers and they've created this pattern in a row. First question says, calculate the sum of the numbers in the 8th row. Okay, so let's first label our rows. So this is row 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we've got to create a pattern for ourselves between row. Okay, we have to correlate the row number with the sum, with the pattern in those rows. Okay. So row 1, row 2, and they're asking us to calculate sum of the numbers in the 8th row. Okay, so let's start by finding our sum of the rows that we currently have. So row 1, the sum is 2, row 2 it's 16, row 3 we're going to have to use a calculator, so 14 plus 18 plus 22 is 54, row 4 26, 30, 34, 38, 1, 28. Okay, because the question is asking us for sum in the 8th row. Okay, so let's just write down our sum pattern. So our sum pattern is 2, 16, 54, 128. Okay, now I'm going to create essentially a pattern from this pattern. And what I can see is the pattern here. So this is T1, T2, T3, T4 of my new pattern. And my new pattern has a pattern of 2 times in 3. So let's work with 2's to the power. So that's my second one. So it's 2 cubed is 8, 8 times 2 is 16. If we go to 3, 3 cubed is 27, 27 times 2 is 54. So this is just by looking. There are other ways to have come up with the like there is another way. So you've essentially got to find the pattern by yourself. Another pattern could be 2, and then we've got 4, 1 plus 2. But essentially this is a lot harder. There's another pattern that can be used. So I think the easiest pattern to see is that we're saying 2 and then we're saying n cubed. Okay? And we're wanting what's in the 8th term. So 8th row. So 8 cubed is equal to, you're going to need to use a calculator. Times 2. So 8 cubed times 2, and the answer is 1024 is going to be the sum. Another way is you could have manually done it for each row. Okay? But that would obviously take a lot more time. Then it says determine the mean of the numbers in the 20th row. Okay. So how are we going to find the mean in the 20th row? So firstly, we can find the sum in the 20th row. Okay, because we just calculated that equation. So finding the sum in the 20th row is going to be 2 times 20 to the power of cubed. And they want the average. Mean is average. So that is the sum, and the sum and average is the total divided by the number of terms in that row. So that is going to be my mean. So I'm just going to quickly revise what I just said. So mean is equal to the sum of the total, okay, so the sum of whatever divided by the number of terms. So in this case, we've got the sum of divided by the number of terms. So it's going to be 1, oh, we got to calculate it. So 20 cubed times 2 is 16,000. Divided by 20, so it's going to be 800. Okay. Okay, number patterns and finance are generally shorter sections in your paper, but it is important that you're able to focus and understand what they're asking, because it's a lot of words. Okay, a lot of new words, a lot of terminology. So let's go to the finance question now. So it says 7 years ago, Mrs. Gray decided to invest 18,000 in a bank account that paid simple interest at 4% per annum. Calculate how much interest Mrs. Gray has earned over the 7 years. Okay, so simple interest is what we're trying to calculate. I think the easiest way to do this is, I would think, to use your simple interest formula. Okay, so simple interest formula you should know is A is equal to P1 plus IN. They do give you the formula. So let's quickly scroll down to this formula sheet so we can see. They don't give me the formula sheet here. So you should be able to identify what is your simple interest and your compound interest formula. Okay, so let's write it out. So 4.1.1, I said A is equal to P1 plus IN. I always like for the student to first initially decipher what is what. Okay, so my P is 18,000. My I is going to be 4.5 divided by 100, which is 0.045. And my N was 7 years. Okay, so that is what I'm going to use now. So 0.045 and my N is 7 years. Let's substitute. Okay, but remember, this is finding my final amount only. The question is asking for interest. Okay, so let's first find the final amount. So 18,000, 1 plus 0.045 times 7. Plug it into your calculator. We get 23670. Okay, the question wants the interest that she has earned over these years, so it's going to be the final. So 23670 minus the initial, which is the 18,000, and her interest that she earned is 5670. Okay, the next question says Mrs. Gray wants to buy a television set. Okay, television set is not important. Television set that costs 22,666 rand now. If the average rate of inflation over the last 5 years was 6.7% per annum, calculate the cost of that television set 5 years ago. Okay, so for inflation, you need to know what formula you use. Use compound interest formula for inflation. Okay, and students often confuse what is the final, what is the initial value for questions like this. Okay, so if they are telling me that this television set, okay, costs 27,666 now, and they want the value of it 5 years ago. That is going to mean that this 27,000 is the final value because it's the future value of it. So the 27,660 is the A value. We are wanting to calculate the initial value. The number of years is 5 and the I is 6.7 over 100, which is 0.067. Okay. So formula, A is equal to P1 plus I to the power of N. Okay. My A is 27,660. My P is what I'm finding, 1 plus 0.067 to the power of 5. Simple. P is equal to 2, 7. I'm dividing the entire both halves by this to eliminate and get P by itself, over 1 plus 0.067 to the power of 5. Into our calculator it goes, and we get an answer of 20,000, which makes sense because it has increased in value. A television set increases in value. So 20,000 was the cost of it 5 years ago. Now it is obviously more. Okay. It says, at what rate of simple interest? So what rate of simple interest is telling me that I'm going to be calculating I. And what rate of simple interest should Mrs. Gray have invested her money 7 years ago if she intends on buying the television set now using her original investment of 18,000 and the interest that it's earned over the last 7 years? Okay? So we want to basically find the interest rate using the original 18,000, the final value of the TV, and we want to see what interest rate she should have used to get that amount. Okay? So we said compounding, it's simple interest is what she originally invested as. So she invested originally using simple interest. We want to find what interest rate she should have used to make sure she had enough money to buy the TV now. And it's after 7 years though. Okay? So the initial value that she invested was 18,000. She is investing it for 7 years, and we want to know what is the interest rate. So I'm going to divide both sides by 18,000. Equations. We always want to isolate what we are finding. Okay? Don't simplify in these equations until the end. Okay? So I'm going to have 7i by itself is equal to 1 plus 7i. There's it here. We're keeping it by itself. Is equal to 27,660. I'm just swapping it around so that it's easier for me to understand. Over 18,000. I want to isolate that 7. Okay? So I'm going to take the 1 to the other side. So I've got 27,660 over 18,000 minus 1. Keep it like that. Divide both sides by 7. Therefore, my I is going to be what? So now you're going to put this entire thing into your calculator, and you're going to get a value of I, which is 0.07666. Times it by 100. It's going to give me an interest rate of 7.67%. Okay. Now let's take a look at our last question in the finance section. So it says, on a certain, now this is an exchange rate question. So it says, on a certain day, the exchange rate between the US dollar and the South African rand is $1 is equal to 12 rand 91. At the same time, the exchange rate between the British pound and the South African rand is €1 is equal to that. Calculate the exchange rate between the British pound and the US dollar. Literally, we are using ratios. Okay, so 4.2, it's saying that $1 is equal to 12 rand 91 cents. 1 pound is equal to 16 rand 52. They want what is between the dollar and the pound. Fairly simple. We just have to divide. Okay, so it's going to be pound over dollar. So it's going to be equal to pound, which is 16 rand 52, over dollar, which is 12 rand 91, and that is equal to, so then one, because we know the pound is a higher, so the pound, 1 pound is equal to $1.28. Okay, we're now moving on to our next section of the paper, which is question 5. We're looking at analytical geometry. Okay, we've just got 3 more questions left to do. Okay, so I want you to quickly read through the question. Let's read through it together. Okay, so it says the diagram shows the graph of gx is equal to ax squared plus q. So what type of graph is that? That's a parabola, because we can see that squared. And we've got an fx is mx plus c, so that's a straight line. We've got a straight line here, and we've got a parabola. R and S we get given the coordinates, are the x-intercepts. Big clue. Okay, they're giving me one of the x-intercepts. And the parabola goes through 0. Okay, t, they give me t, 0, 8, y-intercept of g. The graph f passes through r and t. Okay, first question, 5.1. What is the range of g? So my g graph is the parabola. Range is working with y. Where is my y? My y is at 8. So the range is going to mean that this graph is never going to go beyond 8. All the values are below 8. So the range is y will always be equal to or less than 8. Y values will never go above 8. Okay, 5.2 says write down the coordinates, the x coordinates of r. Very simple. Remember earlier I was so excited that they gave me s, because we know parabola is perfectly symmetrical. So my x coordinates of r is going to be -2, 0. Okay, perfect symmetrical parabola. Okay, next one says calculate the values of a and q in my equation. Fairly simple, because I already know what q is. And what is q? Q is my y-intercept. So ax squared plus 8, because we know what q is. Now we just fairly need to substitute any value. We can substitute r, because r touches that graph, or we can substitute t. So let's substitute r, which is -2 is to 0. So 0 is, because I'm now wanting to find a. So I'm going to take the 8 to the other side. A is equal to 4, divide by 4. A is therefore equal to -2. Don't forget to state that q is equal to 8. So let's write that out here. So g at x is equal to -2x squared plus 8. Okay, fairly simple. We're going really well with this question. It's not difficult at all. Next one says write down the equation of f, a straight line graph. So what are we going to need to do? Firstly, always straight line graph. We need the gradient value. Do we have the c value? Yes, we do. C value is here. It's where it touches the y-axis. It's -8. Then I can just substitute in to find my gradient. Or alternatively, you can find the gradient using r and t. But I think it's fairly easier to substitute. Okay, so we know that c is equal to 8. So we've got f at x is equal to mx plus 8. I'm going to substitute in r, which is -2 is to 0. So 0 is equal to m negative 2 plus 8. Take the 8 to the other side. M negative 2. Divide by negative 2 on both sides. M is therefore equal to 4. Perfect, because now here they're asking for the equation. So make sure you state the equation at the end. Whereas in the previous question they asked for the values of a and q. So my equation is 4x plus 8. Let's write it in here. So f at x is equal to 4x plus 8. Okay, perfect. Let's look at the next question. The next question is asking us to use the graph to determine the values of x. Okay, so we're using the graph to find values of x where f at x is equal to g at x. Very simple. They're wanting to know where the straight line graph and the parabola are equal, where they touch. And they want the x, specifically the x values of it. So we can already see where they touch. They touch at this point where they are 0, and they touch at this point where x is negative 2. So this is 5.5. This is how you would write it, where x is equal to negative 2 or x is equal to 0. The next one says, use a graph to determine for which the values of x times g at x is less than or equal to 0. Okay. So, how are we going to look at this? So we're going to want to look at where this graph is equal to or less than 0. Okay. And where does it fall where the x value, where that graph is, and what are those? Just give it a second. Let's take a look now. Okay. And where that graph is less than or equal to 0, it's firstly between this point here well, it's above where x is greater than 2. Okay. It's when x is greater than negative 2, so in this direction and in this direction. But ensuring that this graph as well, so our answer is therefore going to be 5.5.2, where x is equal to or greater than 2, so that's coordinating for this range here, and where x is greater than negative 2 as well. Okay, the next question says the graph H, a new graph, is obtained when g is reflected along the line of y is equal to 0. Write down the equation of h in this form. Okay, so my g is being reflected, and how do we calculate when g is being reflected along the line? It's going to become negative. So h at x is going to be negative what my gx graph is, which is negative 2x squared plus 8. So it's going to become positive 2x squared minus 8. Okay. Let's go to our next question, which is question 6. Okay, it says the function px is kx plus q is described to have the following properties. So k is greater than 0, k is not equal to 1, we've got x-intercepts, we've got, oh sorry, give me a second. So they're giving us information about this graph. They're telling us that k, this graph, is greater than 0. Okay? They're telling me that k cannot be equal to 1. They're telling me the x-intercept 2 is 0, and they're giving me the horizontal asymptote, which is very helpful. Okay? Firstly, they want me to write down the range. And how do we find the range? The range is telling me from the horizontal asymptote. So this is an exponential graph. Okay, so we know it's an exponential graph, so it's going to look somewhat like that. Okay, so for my range is determined by my horizontal asymptote, so I know my y is going to be greater than -9. It's not going to touch -9, so it can't even be equal to, because I'm going to have an asymptote somewhere along this graph. Okay, write down the equation of p. Okay, so p at x is equal to kx plus q. We know now what q is, because that's my restriction or my asymptote, which is -9. I can substitute because they give me the value of an x-intercept, so I'm going to substitute the x-intercept, which is 2 and 0. So 0 is equal to k squared minus 9. 9 is equal to k squared. I'm going to root both sides. K is therefore equal to 3. And that makes sense because it tells me that the value of k must be greater than 0. So my equation is therefore p at x is equal to 3x minus 9. Let's write that in up here. So p at x is equal to 3x minus 9. Very important. Next it says sketch the graph of p. Show clearly the intercepts with the axis and my asymptote. Okay, so generally in your answer book or in your test they will give you a graph, so you're not going to have to draw a graph. But for the sake of this, I'm going to have to draw the graph. So let's add some grid lines. Okay, so we firstly identify what we're going to plot. We know our asymptote is -9, we have intercepts, and we know the shape, so we should be fine. Okay, those are the 3 important things that you need to plot: the asymptote, a specific. Let's work on plotting it. So let's put in some lines. Let's see if this works. Okay, so I'm going to draw okay. It's not going to be picture perfect, but I'm hoping it does the job of what we need. Okay, so here is my y-axis, here is my x-axis. Okay, and oh, it literally gives it to me. Okay, so let's quickly erase this and let's add it in. Okay, okay, sorry about this. Just give me a second and we're gonna draw our graph now. Okay, so let's draw our graph and revise what we've been given. So we're going to want to draw our x-axis, okay, x-axis, and my y-axis. Now, very important is that we said that we've got an asymptote of -9. So here's my 0. Let's go with that being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so here's my -9. So that is my horizontal asymptote, -9. Then we said we have a point of 2 and 0, which is what they gave us. So that was 0, 1, 2. Okay. Let's go a bit wider. Let's go with this being 1, and let's go with this being 4 intervals 2. Okay. So that's my x-intercept. And then we know the shape of my graph is going to go like that. So, let's put off into shape. And my shape of my graph is not going to touch 9, but it is going to touch the 2. So, marks for the asymptote, intercepts, and the shape. Okay. The next question says the sketch below shows the graph of k over x plus w. So we just did an exponential graph, okay? Now we're looking at a hyperbole, and we've got a straight line, okay? The graph of G is an axis of symmetry of f, and the graphs f and g intersect at P and Q. Write down the value of w. Okay, so let's quickly take a look. So they give me f at x, they give me a point here, which is 2 and 7, and they give me the equation for g at x, which is my straight line graph. Write down the value of w in my equation for the hyperbole graph. Okay, so 6.2.1, we can substitute using these points here to find this, or we can look at they want the value of w, and w is where my graph does not touch. And if G is the axis of symmetry of f, that is going to mean that w is equal to -1. This is -1, so my graph is not going to touch -1. Okay. Then it says 6.2.2, the point 2 at 7 lies on f. Calculate the value of k. So f at x is equal to k over x minus 1. We already established that -1 is my restriction, and I'm going to substitute in -2 and 7. So 7 is equal to, we're wanting to find k, -2 minus 1. Take the 1 to the other side, so I'm going to get 8 is equal to k over -2. We cross multiply, k is equal to -16. So let me write in this equation here. So my k is -16 over x minus 1. Okay. The next question says, so we found k, calculate the coordinates of P and Q. So that is where my two graphs touch each other. They told me that they intersect at those points. And how do you find points of intersection? You find points of intersection by equating the graphs. Six 6.2.3, so we're equating f at x is equal to g at x. F at x we got to be -16 over x minus 1, so we wrote that earlier here, and my g at x they give me, which is -x minus 1. Simple solving. Okay, so how are we going to solve for this? Is firstly I want to get rid of this x as a fraction. So I'm going to multiply both sides by x. going to get minus 16 minus x is equal to minus x squared minus x. Take this to the other side, so I'm going to have x squared plus x minus 16 is equal to 0. That goes away to become 0, so I'm going to be left with x squared minus 16 is equal to 0. Dots. So when I have dots, what do I do now? I've got x, minus, and a plus, 4 and 4. So therefore the points of Q and P, we've got to take a look now, which is a negative and which is a positive. So Q is positive 4 and P is going to be negative 4, taking a look at where they are located. Okay. Next question says write down the value of x for which negative 16 over x is greater than x. Okay, is greater than negative x. So essentially we want to look at those points of where that graph is greater than negative of x, and the points at which we can see. So we said Q is 4 and we said this was negative 4. So Q we said is 4 and P is negative 4. So where that graph is greater than negative x is going to be where it's greater than 4, it's greater, as well as between negative 4 and 0. Okay, so that is the answer then for 6.2.4, where x is greater than 4 and it's between negative 4x and 0. Last question for the paper, probability. Okay, two events, A and B, are complementary and make up the entire sample space. We've got two events. We've also got an event which is not A, 0.35. Complete the statement PA, probability A plus probability B. Okay, so 7.1.1, probability of A plus probability of B, this is testing your knowledge of the laws, is equal to 1. Write down the value of P, A, and B. You should know that P, A, and B is equal to 0. 7.1.3, write down the value of PB. So PB is going to be equal to P not A, which is equal to 0.35. You must know your laws and the knowledge of probability. Now we should be able to actually answer the question, which is not based on testing your knowledge. So it says a survey was conducted among 150 learners in grade 10 at certain schools to establish how many of them own the following devices, a smartphone or a tablet. 8 learners did not own either, 20 learners owned both, 48 learners owned a tablet, and X learners owned a smartphone. Represent the following in a Venn diagram. Okay, so let's draw my big square. Okay, square. Now I'm going to draw my two circles, and I know I've got both, so the circles, there's students that have both, so the circles are going to intersect. Okay, perfect. We know my sample space is 150. We know 8 learners do not own either, so my 8 is done, and we know 20 own both. That's easy. So let's name this smartphone, let's name this tablet. So how many learners owned a tablet? Only 48. So you've got to say 48 minus the 20 that have both, so it's going to be only 28 only own a tablet. Okay, because of those we've got to incorporate the ones that own both. Okay, and then this part is my x, which is going to be x minus 20. The same concept, except we don't know what the value of those that own a smartphone is. So then 7.2.2 says how many learners only owned a smartphone. So now we've got to calculate. So we know my total is 150. We've got to incorporate everything else. So we've got x minus 20, we've got plus 20, plus 28, plus 8. We're solving for x. So 150 is equal to, the 20s go away, and I've got x plus 36. So x is therefore equal to 114. So 114 is the total of smartphone, but how many only own a smartphone is going to be smartphone only is going to be 114 minus the 20, so it's going to be 94. Okay. Next, it says calculate the probability that a learner, okay, so let's edit this now, even though that's the answer, but we know now that it's 94. Okay. Let's erase what's here. Okay. Now we can go to the last part that says calculate the probability that a learner selected at random from this group only owned a smartphone. Okay, for probability for a smartphone only is going to be 94 over the total, which is 150, and as a decimal that's 0.63. Okay, so you can put that into your calculator. And then B, owned at most one type of device. So only one, so which means we can't include the ands. So S or a T, owned at most one type of device. Owned at most, so probability of a student that owned at most one type of device, or neither. Okay. So it's going to be, students calculate the probability of a learner selected that owned at most one type of device. So the 20 learners did not own either, the 8 learners did not own either a smartphone or so we can't include the neither. So it's just going to be either they had a Samsung or a tablet, and that is going to be 94 over 150 plus 28 over 150, and that total is going to be 94 plus 28 is 122 over 150, and if we were to put that as a decimal, it's going to be 0.81. I hope that you found this paper helpful and that you were able to understand the concepts and the topics that were covered. This paper was 100 marks, so it should take you at least 100 minutes, but I think we did fairly well and I really hope it was helpful. Thank you so much for listening and watching.